My name is Sarah, and I'm 29 years old, living in Portland, Oregon. I never imagined that buying my first house would become the ultimate revenge against the parents who abandoned me at a train station when I was 12. But when I discovered the Victorian home I'd purchased was the same house my mother grew up in, the house my father had promised to my brother as his birthright, everything changed. They left me at Union Station just for fun, laughing as they drove away. Now they're begging for my address, and I'm the one laughing. Growing up as Sarah Chan in suburban, Sacramento was like living in a house of mirrors where nothing was quite what it seemed. To the outside world, we were the perfect American family. My father, David, was a successful insurance broker. My mother, Linda, worked part-time at a boutique, and we lived in a well-maintained colonial with a manicured lawn. But behind our front door lived a different reality, one where emotional cruelty, masqueraded as character building and abandonment, was disguised as life lessons. My parents specialized in what they called teaching moments, elaborate scenarios designed to toughen me up for the real world. When I was 8, they left me at a grocery store for 2 hours because I had asked for candy at the checkout. When they finally returned, finding me sobbing with a store manager who was about to call police, my mother simply said, "Maybe now you'll learn not to be so greedy." These incidents weren't accidents or moments of poor judgment. They were calculated exercises in psychological manipulation. My older brother Marcus was 3 years my senior and occupied a completely different universe. Within our household, where I received criticism for a 97% on a math test, Marcus was celebrated for bringing home a B+. Where my achievements were minimized or ignored entirely, his smallest accomplishments were treated like national holidays. The favoritism was so blatant that even family friends occasionally commented on it. Though my parents would laugh it off as sibling rivalry, the pattern continued throughout my childhood. When I made the honor roll, my parents would mention it briefly before launching into detailed discussions of Marcus's latest football game. When I won a regional art competition in middle school, they attended the ceremony but spent the entire time on their phones, leaving immediately after my name was called. Meanwhile, Marcus's participation trophies were displayed prominently on the mantle like Olympic medals. I learned early that love in our household was conditional and scarce. My parents operated on a scarcity model where affection was a limited resource that had to be rationed carefully. Since Marcus had claimed the lion's share, I was left competing for scraps of attention and approval that never seemed to come. I developed coping mechanisms that would serve me well later in life, becoming fiercely independent and self-reliant out of necessity rather than choice. The train station incident happened during the summer before 8th grade. My parents announced we were taking a family trip to San Francisco, something that rarely occurred since most family activities centered around Marcus's sports schedule. I was cautiously excited, hoping this might be an opportunity for normal family bonding. The 3-hour drive from Sacramento passed uneventfully, with my parents discussing Marcus's upcoming high school plans while I stared out the window. When we arrived at Union Station, my father announced he needed to move the car to better parking while my mother wanted to use the restroom. They instructed me to wait by a specific pillar near the main entrance, promising to return in 15 minutes. I stood obediently by the designated spot, watching the bustling crowd of travelers and checking the large station clock as minutes ticked by. 15 minutes became 30 and 45, then an hour at the 90-minute mark. I spotted our family car driving slowly past the station windows. My heart leaped with relief until I saw my parents' faces. They weren't looking for parking or searching for me with concern. They were laughing, actually pointing at me through the window and laughing as if my distress was the most entertaining thing they'd seen all day. My mother rolled down her window and shouted the words that would forever change my relationship with them. Let's see how you find your way home. Just for fun, the casual cruelty of that moment, the genuine amusement they seemed to derive from. My terror crystallized everything I had always suspected about my place in their affections. I wasn't their daughter in any meaningful sense. I was their entertainment, a convenient target for their psychological experiments. As their car disappeared into San Francisco traffic, I realized I was completely alone in a city I didn't know with $7 in my pocket and no way to contact anyone. The next 6 hours were the longest of my young life. I wandered Union, stationed in a daze, too scared to ask for help because my parents had always warned me about stranger danger. I bought a small bag of chips and a soda with my money, rationing them carefully as the day wore on. As evening approached and the station began to empty, a security guard named Miguel noticed me sitting alone on a bench. Clearly distressed, Miguel was patient and kind, eventually coaxing the truth out of me about my situation. His expression grew increasingly grim as I explained how my parents had driven away laughing, leaving me stranded. He contacted the San Francisco Police Department, who took over my case with a seriousness that made me realize for the first time that what my parents had done wasn't just mean, it was illegal. Officer Patricia Williams became my advocate that night, documenting everything with careful attention to detail. She explained that abandoning a minor constituted child endangerment and neglect, serious charges that could result in criminal prosecution. When they finally reached my parents at home in Sacramento, my father's response was dismissive. We were teaching her independence, he told the officer. She needs to learn that life doesn't hand you anything. The Department of Children and Family Services became involved immediately. I spent that night in emergency foster care with the Rodriguez family, kind people who treated me with more genuine warmth in 12 hours than my parents had shown in years. The contrast was stark and painful, highlighting just how abnormal my home life had been. Over the next week, as social workers investigated my case, I learned that my parents' teaching moments constituted a pattern of emotional abuse and neglect. The court proceedings that followed were swift and decisive. My parents were given a choice: complete an intensive rehabilitation program with supervised visitation, or surrender their parental rights. To my surprise, but not my shock, they chose the latter. We're not going to be vilified for trying to raise a strong, independent daughter, my father declared to the judge. If the state thinks it can do better, let them try. And so at 13, I officially became a ward of the state. But my story took a fortunate turn when the Rodriguez family, who had provided my emergency placement, asked to adopt me permanently. Elena and Carlos Rodriguez had been foster parents for over a decade, and something about my situation had touched them deeply. You remind us of ourselves at your age, Elena explained. We know what it's like to feel unwanted, and we want you to know that you're wanted here. The adoption process took 8 months, during which I slowly learned to trust again. The Rodriguez family operated on principles completely foreign to my previous experience: unconditional love, consistent support, and genuine interest in my thoughts and feelings. When I brought home good grades, they celebrated. When I struggled with something, they helped without making me feel inadequate. For the first time in my life, I experienced what healthy family dynamics look like. My new parents encouraged my artistic talents, enrolling me in advanced art classes and supporting my college aspirations. They attended every school event, cheered at my graduation, and cried with pride when I received a full scholarship to Oregon State University. The contrast with my birth parents couldn't have been more stark, where David and Linda Chen had seen my achievements as threats to Marcus's superiority. Elena and Carlos Rodriguez saw them as reasons for celebration. College opened up a world of possibilities I had never imagined. I majored in graphic design with a minor in business, planning to eventually start my own creative agency. My professors recognized my talent and work ethic, several of them becoming mentors who guided my professional development. I graduated summa cum laude and immediately landed a position at a prestigious design firm in Portland. My career flourished in ways I had never dared to dream. Within 3 years, I had been promoted to senior designer and was managing major client accounts. My portfolio grew to include work for Fortune 500 companies, nonprofit organizations, and high-profile startups. The scared 12-year-old who had been abandoned at a train station had become a confident, successful professional who commanded respect in her field. At 28, I felt ready to take the next step toward true independence, homeownership. I had been saving diligently since college, living modestly and investing wisely. My real estate agent, Jennifer Walsh, understood exactly what I was looking for: a historic home with character that I could restore and make my own. When she showed me the Victorian house on Elm Street in Portland's Hawthorne district, I fell in love immediately. The house was a 1920s craftsman with original hardwood floors, built-in bookcases, and a wraparound porch that begged for morning coffee and evening wine. It needed work, but I could see its potential. The asking price was within my budget, and the seller was motivated to close quickly. I made an offer that same day, including a cash component and flexible closing timeline that appealed to the seller's needs. When my offer was accepted, I felt a surge of accomplishment unlike anything I had experienced before. This house would be mine, purchased with money I had earned through my own hard work and talent. No one could take it away from me or use it as leverage for their approval. I was finally truly independent in every sense of the word. The closing process went smoothly, and I officially became a homeowner on a crisp October morning. Standing in my empty living room with the keys in my hand, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude for how far I had come. The abandoned child had become a successful adult who owned property in one of the most desirable neighborhoods in Portland. I spent that first night on an air mattress in my bedroom, listening to the house settle around me and planning all the improvements I would make as I began renovating. Starting with stripping wallpaper in the dining room, I made it interesting. Discovery. Behind a loose section of wallpaper, I found an old photograph tucked into a gap in the wall. The black and white image showed a young woman standing proudly in front of my house, which looked newly built in the photo. On the back, someone had written Linda Sullivan, 1965. Age 16. The name Linda struck me as familiar, though I couldn't immediately place why. I set the photograph aside and continued working, but something about it nagged at me throughout the day. That evening, I called my adoptive mother, Elena, to tell her about my discovery. She listened with interest as I described finding the old photo, and when I mentioned the name Linda Sullivan, she grew quiet. Sarah, Elena said carefully, wasn't your birth mother's maiden name Sullivan? The question hit me like a physical blow. I had never thought much about my birth parents' backgrounds, having deliberately distanced myself from everything connected to them. But as Elena's words sank in, I realized the photograph I had found was of my birth mother as a teenager. Standing in front of a house I had just purchased, I spent the next several hours researching property records and genealogy websites, piecing together a story that explained everything. The house had indeed belonged to the Sullivan family from 1920 until 1985, when it was sold following the death of Linda's parents. Linda Sullivan had grown up in this house, the same house I had unknowingly purchased decades later. The cosmic irony was almost too much to process, but the story became even more complex when I discovered additional documents. According to property records and family court filings I found through online searches, my birth father, David, had been trying to reacquire this house for years. He had contacted previous owners multiple times, expressing interest in purchasing, if for sentimental reasons. His plan, according to legal documents related to his estate planning, was to buy the house and leave it to Marcus as part of his inheritance. The realization that I had inadvertently purchased the house my birth father coveted for my brother was both shocking and deeply satisfying. After years of being treated as less than, of watching Marcus receive preferential treatment in every aspect of our lives, I had unknowingly claimed the prize my father had been saving for his golden child. The abandoned daughter had beaten the favored son to the finish line without even knowing they were racing. I decided not to contact my birth family immediately. Instead, I threw myself into renovating the house, each improvement feeling like an act of reclamation. I restored the original hardwood floors, updated the kitchen while preserving its vintage character, and converted the basement into a home studio for my design work. Every nail I hammered and every wall I painted felt like an assertion of my right to be here, in this space that had once belonged to people who had rejected me. 6 months after purchasing the house, I received an unexpected phone call. The number was unfamiliar, but when I answered, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in 16 years. "Sarah, it's Marcus. Your brother. I need to talk to you about something important." My first instinct was to hang up, but curiosity got the better of me. I listened as Marcus explained that our birth father had been tracking the house on Elm Street for years, waiting for an opportunity to purchase it. Dad has been obsessed with that house since before you were born. Marcus continued, his voice strained. He always said it would be mine someday, part of Mom's family legacy. When he found out someone had bought it, he hired a private investigator to find out who. He discovered it was you, and he's been trying to figure out how to contact you ever since. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had abandoned me at a train station for fun was now desperately trying to reach me because I owned something he wanted. Marcus went on to explain that our birth parents had been following my career from a distance, tracking my success through social media and professional networks. They knew about my design firm, my awards, and my financial success. What they didn't know was where I lived, and that information had become their obsession since discovering I owned their coveted house. "They want to make you an offer," Marcus said. "Dad's willing to pay significantly over market value if you'll sell to him." I let Marcus finish his pitch before responding. "Tell them I'm not interested in selling," I said calmly. "And tell them that if they want to communicate with me, they can do it through attorneys. I'm not interested in direct contact with people who abandon their child for entertainment." Marcus tried to argue, explaining how much the house meant to our father, how it represented our mother's childhood and family history, but I remained firm in my position. "The house means something to me too," I explained. "It represents my independence, my success, and my ability to create a life without them." They gave up any claim to influence my decisions when they drove away laughing that day at Union Station. Marcus's voice grew desperate as he realized I wasn't going to be swayed by emotional appeals or family obligation. He mentioned that our birth parents were willing to offer double the market value, then triple, then whatever price I named. But this was never about money for me. This was about justice, about the abandoned child finally having something the favored son wanted and couldn't have. I told Marcus that the house wasn't for sale at any price and that I considered our conversation concluded. Before hanging up, I added one final message. Tell them that the daughter they threw away bought the house they wanted for their son. And there's a beautiful irony in that. Over the following weeks, I received multiple attempts at contact through various channels. Letters arrived at my workplace, emails came to my professional accounts, and Marcus called several more times with increasingly desperate offers. I ignored them all, having my attorney send a cease and desist letter that established clear boundaries about unwanted communication. The legal document made it clear that any further contact would be considered harassment. The attempts at contact eventually stopped, but I knew my birth parents hadn't given up. Through mutual acquaintances and social media monitoring, I learned that they had hired additional private investigators to gather information about my life. They discovered where I worked, what car I drove, and which restaurants I frequented. But my home address remained elusive. Protected by careful privacy measures I had implemented years earlier, I found their desperation both amusing and pathetic. The same people who had found it entertaining to abandon a 12-year-old child were now consumed with anxiety about not being able to reach that child as an adult. They had created their own hell, a situation where the daughter they had discarded held the key to something they desperately wanted, and their past cruelty had made that key forever inaccessible. Meanwhile, I continued to thrive in the house they coveted. I hosted dinner parties for my chosen family, including Elena and Carlos, who visited regularly. I created a beautiful garden in the backyard, filled with flowers that bloomed in defiance of the neglect the property had suffered before my ownership. I established a home office where I ran my growing design business, taking on clients who appreciated my creativity and professionalism. The house became a symbol of everything I had achieved despite my birth parents' attempts to break me. Every morning when I woke up in the master bedroom, I remembered the scared child who had been abandoned at a train station, and I marveled at how far she had come. The Victorian home wasn't just my residence, it was my fortress, my sanctuary, and my ultimate victory over people who had underestimated my resilience. 2 years after purchasing the house, I received one final communication from my birth family. It came through my attorney, a formal letter offering to purchase the property for 5 times its market value. The letter included emotional appeals about family history. It was signed by both David and Munda Chun, the first time I had seen their names in writing since my adoption papers. I instructed my attorney to respond with a simple message: the property is not for sale at any price, and any further communication regarding this matter will be considered harassment subject to legal action. I also included a personal note that I knew would reach them eventually. The daughter you abandoned for fun is now living in the house you wanted for your son, and she has never been happier. Consider it a life lesson about the consequences of cruelty. The silence that followed was deafening and permanent. My birth parents finally understood that their past actions had consequences they couldn't buy their way out of. The child they had treated as disposable had grown into an adult who held something they desperately wanted, and their own cruelty had made it impossible for them to obtain it. They had taught me independence at Union Station, and I had learned the lesson too well for their comfort. Today, 5 years after purchasing the house, I still live in the Victorian home that represents my triumph over abandonment and neglect. I've expanded my design business into a full-service creative agency with 12 employees and clients across the country. The scared 12-year-old who was left at a train station has become a successful entrepreneur who owns property her birth parents can only dream of accessing. I've never given them my address, and I never will. They left me at a random train station just for fun, laughing as they drove away. Now I'm the one laughing, living in their dream house while they remain locked out of my life forever. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting everything they wanted while they watch from the outside, powerless to change the consequences of their own cruelty. The house on Elm Street isn't just where I live. It's where I learned that the family you choose matters more than the family you're born into. It's where I discovered that success is the sweetest revenge, and that sometimes the children who are thrown away become the adults who end up with everything their parents wanted for someone else. They taught me independence that day at Union Station, and I used that independence to build a life they can never touch, in a house they can never enter, with an address they'll never know. What moments in your life have taught you that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you? Have you ever found unexpected strength in situations where you were abandoned or underestimated? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their past doesn't determine their future. Remember, sometimes the people who hurt us the most end up teaching us exactly what we need to succeed without them. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to build the life you deserve.